To see everybody at our weekly Wednesday night Zera Shimshon class, and we are very excited to welcome everybody who's here, everyone tuning in online, and everyone that's going to see it over the next couple days, hopefully before Shabbat as well. Tonight's class has three sponsors. We want to thank our sponsors in no specific order. Meir and Stephanie Friedman in honor of their two granddaughters, Neta Penina and Zahava Shoshana, and in honor of their great report cards and Zahava's Siddur ceremony. So big Ma'azal Tov. You should see a lot of naches from them and from all your grandchildren. Amen v'amen. Beautiful. Next is tonight's class is also for the Refuah Shlema of Yaakov Azriel ben Gedalia Shlomo. We have a quick and speedy Refuah Shlema with great results. Amen. Finally, my parents are sponsoring also for the Refuah Shlema of my grandfather Gavriel ben Mesoda, who today had eye surgery on both his eyes. B'ezrat Hashem should be very well, and he should recover, and he should have a quick and speedy refuah, along with all those that are in need of a quick healing and recovery. Amen. So, I know I say this every week, but guess what? This week's exciting again. So there we go. But it's very exciting because it's the beginning of a new book. We always like new beginnings. It's not only Jews, by the way. Everyone likes new beginnings. New beginnings gives hope, gives a new chance. And this gives an opportunity for anybody who maybe was learning on a weekly basis to maybe up it. Now we have daily basis opportunities. Anyone who wasn't even learning on a weekly basis, well, maybe now's a good time to jump in on the Zera Shimshon, on the Parashat. Whatever a person can do to add to the new beginning is a beautiful endeavor. It's a beautiful opportunity. And we look at every new beginning, and if in the new beginning of a book, the book of Exodus, as that opportunity as well. The greatest difference between what we've been speaking about till now and what we're going to speak from now and on for the remaining four books of Moses is the way Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch puts it so beautifully, that up until now we were speaking about individuals and a family. Okay? Noah, or Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his children. Although it's a large family, but it's a family. What we're doing from now, what the Torah does from now, is it transitions from a family into a nation. And there's tremendous ramifications on the way God looks upon and judges and treats a nation opposed to a family. A nation is the masses. And there's a lot of merit that comes along with the masses. We're going to see and we're going to read about how much God really bears the nation and their faults opposed to individuals. I mean, for all intents and purposes, God judged Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their children pretty stringently. We see that what the nation gets away with, the individuals in the family could have never gotten away with. Okay, this is something interesting to note, something that we are very fortunate to be part of the nation opposed to the family or the individuals, because God is definitely sparing us and showering us down with plenty of mercy and compassion. That's one aspect I wanted to pay attention to. The next is right in chapter 1. If anyone has a chumash, they could follow along. If not, I'll read it and I'll explain and translate it. Right at the beginning, verse 6 tells us, I'm going to quote it to you, that Joseph dies and all his brothers, v'chol hador hahu, and that whole generation. So there's a complete change. As we know, world's round, life cycles, and we keep on moving, okay? The whole generation passes on. Ubnei Israel, so what happens to the Jewish people at this point, and it gets even more overwhelming? Paru vayishretzu vayirbu vayatzmu bim'od me'od. It says, I want to read the translation for this. It says, the children of Israel were fruitful, teemed, increased, and became strong, very, very much so, and the land became filled with them. So, in 6 different terminologies, the Torah is telling us that the Jews multiplied, became very successful. They were all over the land of Egypt. Let's pause for a moment. Was that Joseph's intention? Absolutely not. Joseph wanted the Jewish people to stay in their little shtetl, their little ghetto, Goshen. However, what happens when Jews get comfortable and Jews have babies and more babies and more babies? They start going all over the place. And they were being found, as the Midrash says, all over Egypt. Not only within their boundaries of Goshen, they were everywhere. They were involved in politics. They were involved in business in the highest realms. They were involved in their entertainment and their media at whatever technological capacities they had back then. They were into their sports. They were really entrenched in the Egyptian society. Pause. Does that make you think of today a little? Okay, play. Let's forget that. Let's speak about that later.
Does she have the bills to pay for?
Not really. Not really. Okay, so the Jewish people were really, really getting into the complete society, the mind frame, the way of life of the Egyptian people. And this specifically happened after the passing of Joseph and his brothers, once that that generation, moved on. Okay. Then we have this very famous verse. This is verse 8. This is in chapter 1, verse 8. That Vayakom melech chadash asher lo yadat Yosef. And there was a new king. And you know what this new king claimed? He didn't know who Joseph was. Okay? That's like saying any of our presidents, whether you like them or not, whether you consider them qualified or not, educated or not, doesn't matter. Okay? Doesn't matter where they were born. Whether they are for sure born in the States, or there's a doubt if they're born in the States. I'm not having anyone in mind specific. But no matter who it is, any of them cannot come and claim, I don't know who George Washington was. It's impossible. Of course, did you know him? Did you not know him? You cannot be a king, a politician, and not know your basic ABCs of the government that you are serving for, or ruling for that matter. So this was definitely a scheme. This was a scheme, as we know, the commentaries have two opinions. It was the same king, and he just made as if he didn't know, or it was a new king, and he really didn't know him. I say it doesn't matter. According to both opinions, they're trying to pull a quick one and trying to take advantage of a situation against the refugees in their country. Fair? Agreed? Okay. So what does he do? He comes and he tells his nation, Vayomer alamo, wow, these Jews, they are multiplying way faster than us. In no time, they're going to overcome. We got to get smart. We got to come up with a plan to make sure that they don't take over the land that we are ruling, that we own. And then we know that unfortunately they come up with this idea that all the boys are going to be sent to their death. And at first, they tried to do this in a political manner. What did he do? As most politics take place behind closed doors, he called over the two midwives, Shifra and Pua, who we know are really Yocheved and Miriam, Moses' mother and very own sister. Beautiful. He comes over to them and says, you better make sure that every male Jew that is delivered doesn't really make it. You figure out. You want to hold something pointy, you want to crush their neck, God forbid, whatever you have to do, make sure that there are no boys. Why did they go after the boys and not the girls? Because the boys were going to be the ones that are going to grow, be strong, join the army, and eventually retaliate. They didn't realize that they maybe should have went for the girls as well, or maybe only the girls, because if there were no girls, how could they have any children? It just wouldn't take any place.
The girls for their own men.
Very good. Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Okay, this was their plan. Their plan was all the boys. Did it happen? Could we ever imagine that Yocheved and Miriam, both being prophetesses, would ever commit such a crime? Obviously not. When they were summoned to Paro, I'm doing a quick recap before we get to the meat and potatoes of today's Zera Shimshon, okay? When they're summoned by Paro, and Paro says, hey, what's going on? How come are there so many boys being born? I hear there's non-stop, I'm going to say something, but it's completely false, and we'll soon see. How come are there so many brisim going on? Okay, it's false because we're going to soon learn that the Jewish people stopped doing bris. Okay, but he heard all these announcements of baby boys being born. What's going on? So they come and they tell him, you know, these Jewish women, they're like animals. What does that mean? That they don't need a midwife. By the time we come into the delivery room, they already laid their egg. Okay, they already hatched their baby, literally. And I mean, literally, that's how right? There's no such thing as a midwife for an animal. So that's what they meant by that. They obviously weren't trying to insult the Jewish women. They were trying to cover themselves because obviously they didn't give birth by themselves. They were helping them. So then they got a little less politically correct. And the Egyptians and Pharaoh decrees that all of the males born are going to be sent to the Nile. This was something very serious. At this point, the leader of the Jewish people in this episode, Amram, the very father of, at that time only, Miriam and Aaron, decides to divorce his very own wife, Yocheved, which was the daughter of Levi. Okay? The direct granddaughter of Jacob, just so we put things into proper realm. So Amram divorces his wife, Yocheved. What do good constituents, what do good followers do? They follow their leader. So the very next day, all the other Jews all got divorced. What happens, unfortunately, when the overwhelming majority of people, of the couples of a nation or of a tribe or a family are divorced? There's no more children coming. So there was one very, very clever girl, and we all know who that was, and that was Miriam. Miriam, Amram's daughter, comes to him and says, Dad, I respect you. You're a very wise man. You must know what you're doing. Here's an observation of a little girl. She was all of, does anyone know how old she was?
6.
5 at this point. Though she was 5.5, let's to be sure. Okay? She was all of 5.5 years old. She comes and says, I want to give you a little girl's perspective. So you see, Pharaoh decreed against, up for grabs, 50% of all Jewish people being born. Yours is decreeing against 100% of all Jews. There's going to be no more Jews. You're actually doing better for him and worse for us. You're giving no living chance to our nation at all. Now, being the leader, conceding to your 5.5-year-old daughter is something great. The very next day, there's a chuppah. And the very next day, all of the wedding halls in Egypt are booming because everyone gets remarried. And everybody has children. Obviously, that's what happens, right? Night of the wedding. And because of that, Moses himself was born. Now, when Moses was born, there was a big question because the Egyptians knew that right after everyone gets married, well, the next thing that happens is 9 months later, they're going to be giving birth. So they monitored, they took note of what date it was, and then they said, okay, in 9 months we're going to come around and we're going to pick up all the babies. They're going to try to hide them from us. And a great miracle was made. Moses was delivered at 6 months, and his parents had him for 3 months to at least take care of him for those first 3 and critical months. At that point, he was put into the Nile River, and miraculously, God ordained it that this little basket makes its way all the way to Pharaoh's palace, where his daughter Batya finds the child while she was dipping for her conversion, and takes the child in and takes it as a sign from God, this is my child. Like, it must have not crossed her mind it's a Jewish baby. Or better yet, maybe she knew. But when she brought it to her father made the decree that all babies should be thrown into the Nile River. Oh no, and didn't cross his mind that it may be a Jewish baby. Okay, the answer to that is God obviously withheld that thought from Pharaoh's mind in order that this whole story of the Exodus and Moses being saved come about and actually take place. Okay, having said that, over some years of learning, I put together a quick timeline of Moses' life. Okay, ArtScroll did a great job on the life of Jacob. For whatever reason, they left out the life of Moses. If you look at the back of the brand new stone Chumashim, there's a lot of diagrams, colorful ones, beautiful ones, and they do the life of the patriarch Jacob. The other ones weren't, I guess, so exciting, but I, in my opinion, believe that Moses' life was very exciting. And there's a lot of information that we may not know, and we may not understand how old he was at that time. So I'm going to just do a quick recap of the life of Moses, and with that we're going to delve into the Zera Shimshon's fascinating interpretations that we are going to see this evening. So at first we have to pay attention that Moses was born 130 years after the Jewish people immigrated, or the family of Jacob immigrated into the land of Egypt. How did I get that number? Because Yocheved was born the moment the Jewish people entered the land of Egypt, and she passed the moment they entered, right? And she passed the moment they left. So she lived exactly 210 years. Okay? At this point, she was 130 years old when she gave birth to Moses. So that's how we know Moses was at 130 years into the Jewish people's stay and immigration into the land of Egypt. That would take us to the year 2368 from the creation of the world, just so we know. Okay? Next thing that is great, besides for after 3 months being brought to Paro's daughter, and then Paro's daughter going out and trying to retrieve a Jewish woman to nurse this baby, because it was evident that this baby was not nursing any from any of the other women. Why? God wanted to keep his mouth pure and clean. He's going to be speaking the word of God. God's voice is going to be speaking from his very own throat. He didn't want his mouth to drink from non-kosher or non-Jewish milk. Okay? After that whole episode, the greatest next episode in Moses' life was the first time he comes out of the palace. First time he comes out of the palace, he's approximately 20 years old. Okay, 19, 20, could play with that number a little bit. But at 20 years old, he comes out for the very first time. So for 20 years, he was being groomed as this royal prince that obviously was not going to be the king, because everyone knew he was, or the power, because everyone knew he was this alien that came in on a basket. But he was literally the equivalent in every level to being the heir to the throne. But he always knew deep down that he was not like everyone else. He comes out and he sees his fellow brothers and sisters, and he sees them being tortured tremendously. And he felt for them, and he actually witnessed an Egyptian taskmaster beating the living daylights out of another fellow Jew. He comes up to him and he murders the man. At that point, he got scared. He quickly ran back to the palace. The next day, he comes out again to see his fellow brothers and sisters suffering at the hands of the Egyptians. And he sees two Jews fighting, getting physical with each other. And he comes over to them and he says, "Guys, what are you lifting a hand from one another? What's wrong with you?" And they're both Jews. We know these are the troublemakers that accompany us throughout the whole desert, Datan and Aviram, or for Ashkenaz vernacular, Dasan v'Aviram, okay? Just in case you didn't get it. So he looks at them and he tells them, "What are you raising a hand for?" He tells them, "Are you such a tzaddik? We saw you murder the man the other day." And at that point, he realized why the Jewish people are in their slavery, why they're in exile. They don't even have love or compassion for one another. It's kind of unfortunately similar to today as well, why we're still in exile. But moving on that. These two individuals go and snitch on Moses to Paro. At this point, Paro sent out a mission to have Moses brought back, dead or alive, preferably dead. Moses picks up, and at the age of 20 years old, runs away from the life he knows, from the world he was born into. And he runs to the wilderness. On his passing, I'm giving you now the interpretation of the Mamlo Ezra by Yaakov Kuli, which is second to none. Listen to what we're about to say. It's very, very fascinating. It shows us a lesson in war, in tactics, in leadership, all in one. So Moses comes to a place called Cush. He gets to this city, and he finds none other than its king kicked out, not able to enter. And he asks the king. The king's name was Kokinos. Okay, interesting name. Okay, King Kokinos. And he asks the king, "What's up?" He says, "It's been 2 years, I'm out. I had to leave for battle, and when I came back and I returned, they did not open the gates for me." Bilam, does everyone know Bilam? Bilam was one of Paro's 3 main advisors. And after he gave also the advice to Paro to murder the Jewish boys, he also fled from Paro. Lesson in life, don't stay too close to the people in control, because they are very friendly when they need you, and later on they not so friendly. This is the Mishnah in Masechet Avot teaches us this. So he learned his lesson. Bilam, by the way, was one of the most genius individuals. He was ridiculous in some realms, but he was very smart in other. He left. and he comes to Cush, and he becomes the advisor of the king. And when the king, Kokinas, leaves to go fight a battle, he returns, and Bilam elected himself as the ruler of the city and did not allow the king to return. He fortified the city walls, 3 of the walls with water, being no way to get in, and the 3rd with venomous and poisonous snakes. He made his point that King Kokinas is no longer welcome in this city. Very, very interesting. So Moses comes, he meets this king, and he's trying to come up with ideas with him, how to get him back in. He wants to help him. Oh, you're royally educated. You must know different rules of war, tactics of war. Moses comes up with a great idea. He tells all the men to go out and find some stork, okay, it's a type of a pelican. And he tells them, raise them from a young age and teach them how to eat snakes. Make that their diet. Okay? And the anticipation is that when they get old enough, we can send them out to go consume all of those venomous and poisonous snakes, and then that gives us an entry to climb over the wall and take back your city. The king loved it. However, Moses' stay outside of this wall, it sounds like a movie, like a story, right? Okay. He actually was out there for 7 years with the king. And the king fell deathly ill. And within 7 days, King Kokinas passes away. Before passing, he tells his men that Moses is your new leader. He was attributing gratitude to him for coming up with this amazing idea to get back. And Moses is now named the ruler of the soon-to-be, to conquer city of Cush. And so it was. They played out their tactic, and they took over this city, and Moses was, the Midrash says, the king of Cush. The king, the ruler of Cush, for no less than 4 decades. 40 years. So Moses goes from being in a palace for the first 20 years of his life. He now has 7 years of being in the wilderness, trying to get back into a city with the lost king, and then he becomes the king of this great city. At that point, after 40 years, right, after all good things, there's got to be something terrible that happens sometimes. So what happens at this point is the child of the king of Cush, Kokinas' son, he gets older, and Moses right away felt like, okay, this kid now wants to become ruler. If I don't split, then there's going to be a civil war. So Moses escaped, and he's on the run again. At this point, he's 67 years old. Where does he find himself go to? He finds himself in Midian. In Midian. And in Midian, he comes and he sees these girls around a well being tormented by other shepherds. He comes and he saves them. Yitro sees him, and Yitro recognizes him. He says, this is no regular man. This is no Egyptian. This is no king of Cush, whatever he's talking about. This is Moses. This is Paro's adopted grandchild, who Paro has a death warrant for. So he got scared that he'd be caught holding Moses, and he threw him into jail. And he threw him into jail with the intention to not feed him, let him die of starvation. Tzipporah, Yitro's eldest daughter, every single day would sneak and bring him food. After 10 years of being in jail, Yitro completely forgot about him. He thought he died after a week or 2, who knows. Tzipporah intelligently tells her father, hey, whatever happened with that Egyptian guy that you threw into jail? Wink, wink. Okay? And Yitro says, that guy's gone. It's been 10 years. She says, I'll make a deal with you. If I find him and he's miraculously alive, it means that the gods have been showing favor to him, and let's take him in. And so it was. Yitro goes to the jail, sees Moses, and then he offers his daughter for him to marry. But there was a rule. There was like this big trick, and this is why Tzipporah wasn't married yet. Kind of like the story of King Arthur, right? Removing the sword out of the stone. But Yitro had a little bit of a different scheme. So Yitro came with a great staff. This staff was passed down. We've spoken about this great staff before. It was Adam's staff that was passed on to Noah, to Shem, and then Jacob, and then Yehuda, and it made itself all the way down to Egypt in Paro's possession after Joseph passes away. When Yitro escapes, after not giving him advice, after not giving Paro the advice to, God forbid, kill the Jewish boys, he takes this staff with him. He knew it was something very special. He takes this staff and he puts it in the ground, and it gets stuck. It's like something miraculous. And he made a deal. He said, any man who's able to go and remove the staff from the ground can not only keep the staff, but have my daughter's hand in marriage. But there was a trick to this proposal. If you weren't able to take the staff out, the staff somehow killed the person trying to take it out. Interesting, okay? Sounds like a fairy tale almost. And so it was. He told Moses, listen, I took you out. Here's your test. You can have my daughter's hand in marriage, but you got to pull out this staff. He goes over, he pulls it out with a breeze. Okay? And that's how Moses gets his staff that he's going to perform the rest of the miracles with, and how he marries his wife, Tzipporah. Okay? At this point, Moses is 77 years old. Okay? He was 10 years in jail. Okay, now we're getting to the exciting things. He marries Tzipporah, he has his first son. His first son's name is Gershom. Okay? A couple years later, when he's around 79, 80, he has his second son. Second son name is Eliezer. At this point, God reveals himself to Moses through a burning bush. And this is what we're going to speak about right now from the Zera Shimshon. And he argues and negotiates with Moses for 7 days until Moses concedes to God that he will be going and sent by God as a messenger to redeem the Jewish people. He finally agreed to it. He leaves, he goes on his way, and he's heading towards Egypt, and he's 80 years old. We'll stop here because the rest of the life of Moses is explained to in the Torah. But because again, he's 80, in the next 40 years, he's traveling and leading the Jewish people in the wilderness. Very good. No. Okay. All right. That's Moses' life in a nutshell for us, especially in whatever the Midrash doesn't, the Torah doesn't tell us. Okay. The Zera Shimshon analyzes a pasuk, and he analyzes that very pasuk that is brought down of God revealing Himself to Moses through the burning bush. Anyone who's following can turn to chapter 3, verse 2. We have Chumashim over here also. Chapter 3. Let's start at 1. Chapter 3, verse 1 says, Moshe haya ro'eh et tzon Yitro. We're on page 300. And Moses was a shepherd grazing the flock of his father-in-law Yitro, Kohen Midyan. And he finds his way all the way to the mountain of God, where God is eventually going to reveal Himself to the Jewish people at. Okay, now this is the verse. Vayar malach Hashem elav belabat esh mitoch haseneh. And an angel of God, and God reveals Himself to Moses in the famous burning bush. Now vayar v'hinei haseneh boer ba'esh, and Moses sees this burning bush. V'hinei haseneh enenu ukal. However, I guess there could be forest fires or desert fires, but after you looking at a bush or a tree for a while and it's not getting consumed by the fire, you say, this must mean something. And then we know that God and Moses have their discussion, their prophetic discussion, right there and then. The Zera Shimshon asks a beautiful question based on a midrash. The midrash is a Yalkut Shimoni, and he says the midrash is very puzzling, as we're soon going to see. He says the midrash tells us that, I have it in Hebrew over here, God says to Moses, okay, because of the hatred that Joseph's brothers had towards Joseph, I am now revealing myself through this burning bush, and now we are ready to redeem the Jewish people from their exile. As the verse says in Tehillim, in Psalms, Ga'alta bizroa amecha b'nei Yaakov v'Yosef Selah. The verse, loosely translated, is, "You redeemed with your powerful arm your nation, the children of Jacob and Joseph." To this, the Zera Shimshon wants to understand what is the connection with this verse and the concept of the sineh, the burning bush. He wants to know, what's the whole idea that a burning bush is the way God's revealing himself because the brothers of Joseph hated Joseph? What's the correlation? Hatred and burning bush? Is there any relation? Last thing the Zera Shimshon asks is, based on the verse in Tehillim, which he questions why it's even brought, says it doesn't look like it was in the merit of Joseph the Jewish people were redeemed. Rather, it looked like it was in the merit of Jacob and Joseph. So who was it? The beginning of the Midrash tells us it was Joseph's merit. And then the verse that we're bringing to prove it tells us in Jacob and Joseph's merit. So which one is it? Whether you got the question or not, it doesn't really matter, because based on the answer, we're going to really understand this Midrash in its entirety. He says as follows. He wants to explain this Midrash and this phenomenon of the burning bush, addressing another question. The question is, what was the reason why the Jewish people wound themselves up in Egypt, in exile? Was there something specific to that? So he brings two different opinions. He brings the opinion of actually two different Kabbalists. Okay, they each have their own opinion. The first being the Megalei Amukot. The Megalei Amukot, who the Zera Shimshon has quoted a couple times, tells us the reason for the Jewish people finding themselves in exile in Egypt was because of the way the the brothers of Joseph treated Joseph, and how they mistreated and disregarded their father's own emotional and moral health. Okay? Let's remind ourselves, the Zera Shimshon tells us, 22 years, day in, day out, Jacob was mourning the loss of his favorite son, Joseph. How heartless as a child can you be to do that to your father? So listen to this mathematical equation the Megalei Amukot provides us with. He says, all 10 brothers were accountable for 22 years of Jacob's suffering. If you do 22 times 10, you get 220. But how many years were the Jewish people in Egypt for? 210. So where did it go? If they should be all punished, their descendants should be all punished for based on all of the lack of respect and the hatred they displayed towards their brother. Well, how comes they're minus 10? He says because they each passed away outside of the land of Israel, so they each got a reimbursement of 1 year. So 1 year for each of them, minus 10. So that's 22 times 10, 220. Minus 10, you're back to 210, which is the gematria of redu, go down. Resh, 200, Dalit, and Vav, another 10. The Jewish people are to go down to Egypt for exactly 210 years. And so it was. From the moment they entered to the moment they left was exactly 210 years. The Zera Shimshon says, according to the first opinion, the Megalei Amukot, is that the Jewish people wound up in Egypt for one reason and one reason only, and that was because of the hatred the brothers had towards Joseph. He says, now what's the connection between that hatred and the burning bush? The word sin'ah, hatred in Hebrew, is very similar to the word seneh. Seneh is the burning bush, and sin'ah means hatred. The Zera Shimshon says this is one answer of why God specifically presented himself to Moses in a form of a burning bush. To hint to him, sneh, right, this burning bush, is because of the sin'ah. Very similar words, okay? It's a play on words. Now the Zera Shimshon brings another opinion. Now this opinion, most of us have heard this before, okay? This next part is brand new for me. This is like fresh off the press, okay? Listen to this. The Zera Shimshon quotes a book I've never heard before. It's called the Gali Razia. Definitely something Kabbalistic, just by its name of the book. And he says, do you know why the Jewish people wound up in Egypt? It wasn't because, this was actually decreed way before the brothers hated Joseph. This was because of Jacob. Jacob? How so? Jacob, because of something he did, and we'll explain, was a cause to allow Aramaic verbiage into our Holy Torah. And we're going to think, so what's the big idea? What's the big deal with that? We'll hear. Give us a moment. Let's explain it. When was this? So Jacob is running away from his father-in-law with his children and his wives and his livestock and his fortune, and basically leaves Lavan barren. No family, barely any money to his name. He basically outlived him in every way. Lavan chases him. Lavan is come to by God, and God warns him, hey, watch it, don't touch your son-in-law. He's on my tab. So they make a pact. And Lavan tells him, I want you to take a vow to me that you will take care of my children and my grandchildren, and that you will not marry any more wives. I think 4 is enough, he said. Okay? Or 2 plus 2. And they made a pact. And Jacob, he was forthcoming with this treaty and this agreement. He said, let's build a monument. Let's get some stones and build a monument to solidify this treaty. So he tells his sons to each bring a stone. These stones are erected into a pile, and that was their peace treaty that they made between the two of them. Lavan calls this pile of stone, in an Aramaic word, he calls it Yegar Sahaduta, which is literally a translation of a pile of stone. So this answer, the Galei Razia says that since Jacob was the reason why a foreign language, Aramaic, none other than Aramaic, as we'll soon see, entered into our very own Torah, that's when it was decreed that the Jewish people will be exiled. You're going to say, what does, I don't know, price of fish in China have to do with life here in America? Right? Nothing. You think, okay? This is what the Razi Galia answers, and the Zera Shimshon quotes it. Okay. He goes on to explain 3 different instances where we see that Aramaic was something derogatory or negative in the fact that Jacob brought it into the Bible. Let's see. Okay, anyone following, in Genesis chapter 37, verse 25, it says as follows, Vayisu enehem, and this is when the brothers are about to sell their brother Joseph to the Ishmaelite merchants. It says, they lifted their eyes, Vayir'u v'hineh orchot Ishmaelim ba mil Gilad. And there is a group of Ishmaelite peddlers, merchants, that are coming from Gilad. Gilad, what does it have to do with anything? You know how he explains it? Zera Shimshon explains that Gilad is the same letters as Galed, which was the very same word that Jacob referred to as that pile of stone, hinting to, this is only part 2 of the reason why we're entering the land of Egypt. The first reason why we're entering is because your father made the Aramaic language get into our Torah. So the very fact that they're coming from Galed is seemingly superfluous. The reason is because that's hinting to your father, Jacob, having Aramaic, Yigar Saduta, enter our Bible, which we still don't know why it's so bad yet. We'll see. Hold on one second. Next. In Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 5. Okay? This is by the story of Bikurim, the first fruits that every Jew would bring to the temple as a sign of thanksgiving and praise for the miracle of having that first fruit being born. And what happens at that point is a quick recap. The quickest recap, by the way, of Jewish history is said there. Every single person who would bring their Bikurim, their first fruit, to the temple, made a quick recap of basically them thanking God for where they've come from and to where they are today. The quickest recap ever. We'll learn about it when we get there again. We've done it before. However, you want to know how the quick recap encapsulates our patriarchs? As follows. Arami, Oved, Avi, Vayered, Mitzrayma, Lagur, Sham. Okay, let me translate that for you. Arami tried to destroy our father, and then we ended up moving to the land of Egypt. Arami, well, we know that that's Lavan ha'Arami, right? Lavan tried to tried to destroy Jacob, and thank God he didn't, because then Jacob would not have had his 12 tribes, and there would be no nation. Okay? But the word Arami seems so similar to Aramaic. And it is. The Zera Shimshon says that Arami of David, that Arami tried to destroy our father, means it was the fact that Aramaic was pronounced into our Torah, was written into our Torah, that our nation was almost completely destroyed in Egypt. One more example is something we say in our Haggadah on Pesach. We say, when the Torah tells us, Vayered Mitzrayma, that the Jewish people went down to Egypt, it says, Ones al pi hadibur. They were forced based on words. Forced based on words? Well, there's many interpretations, but according to our interpretation, yes, the Jewish people were forced into Egypt based on words that Jacob allowed to enter our Torah, namely the Aramaic language. So after I'm going on and on and on, and the Zera Shimshon is going on and on about how severe the Aramaic language is entering our Torah, what's the big idea? So he goes on to explain, and he says that the Aramaic language, I want to say it properly, the Aramaic language is a dialect of negative forces. Really? Why? Well, we know the Talmud also tells us that angels don't understand Aramaic. So many understand that to mean that, well, that's why we do Kaddish in Aramaic. That's why we do certain prayers, and even the famous portion in the Haggadah. Halach, very good. Thank you sorry for the brain freeze. Very good. Halach Manya is also done in Aramaic. These what? No, that's not Aramaic. That's Hebrew. Okay.
Misharatam also.
Who?
Misharatam.
Could be. Again, there's different traditions, but the two main parts of our service that's done in Aramaic is the Halach Manya on Passover, as well as our Kaddish, our memorial prayer that we normally say, and part of our prayer on a daily basis. So many like to say that, because it's such a high level, we don't need the angels to deliver it and to interpret it to God. According to this interpretation, on the contrary, it's actually a dialect that has negative connotations to it, and that's why the angels don't understand it, and that's why Jacob was punished for allowing that language to get into our Torah, which we still think that the punishment is way more severe than the crime. Let's, again, hold off, because we're going to get to the bottom of it. The Zera Shimshon says, according to this answer, what does the fact that God shows himself, he displays himself into a burning bush to speak to Moses? According to the first answer, because it was the hatred, okay, so we know sin'ah and sineh, hatred and the burning bush, are similar. So that's what it has to do with one another. But now, what does this Midrash now have to say that God comes and he displays himself in a burning bush in the merit of Joseph, and then quotes a verse that actually mentions Jacob and Joseph? We have no explanation to now why God coming and showing himself into a burning bush. It wasn't anything to do with the hatred. It had to do from before that. It had to do from Jacob allowing Aramaic to get into our Torah. We hear the question? Listen to the fascinating answer that Zera Shimshon says. He says, even if you want to say the reason is not because of the hatred of the brothers, but we still can understand why God comes and displays and shows himself in a burning bush. See, there was something very interesting about the burning bush. The burning bush, as we mentioned, didn't consume. It was not consumed by the fire. And that's what caught Moses' attention, as we mentioned. Joseph was very similar to the burning bush. How so? Well, Joseph did something, and this is what spared him and spared his family from moving down. Besides for the three that you mentioned, we're going to mention in a moment. But Joseph did something very special. He made sure to always speak in his mother tongue. Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh. Why? Well, he knew the power that it had. He knew that by speaking Lashon HaKodesh, the holy tongue, that would keep him a cut above the rest, different than the rest, specifically. The Zera Shimshon brings proofs to the fact that he was always known to speak in the holy tongue. Listen to the following. And based on that, we're going to soon see how he's likened to the burning bush. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 14, Potiphar's wife, when framing Joseph, she screams out and says, Hivilanu ish ivri. Oh, my husband brought us this Hebrew man. Ish ivri, why was he referred to as that? Because he always spoke Hebrew language. Next, Genesis chapter 41, verse 12. The butler! Remember, The guy who was serving Saramashkim, serving Paro wine, and he wound up in jail? Very nice. What happens 2 years later when he remembers the promise he made to Joseph that he would mention him to Paro? He mentions him as follows, Visham itanu na'ar ivri. And with us in jail, there was a Hebrew lad. Hebrew? Yeah, because he was always speaking Hebrew. Next, Genesis chapter 45, verse 3. Joseph tells his brothers, when he reveals himself, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. Okay. A couple of verses later, in verse 12, it says, V'ine enechem ra'ot. Joseph says, your eyes see me, and the eyes of Benjamin see me. Ki pi hamdaber alechem, because this mouth is speaking to you. The Midrash says this mouth is speaking to you. Who else would speak Hebrew? It must be me. He didn't forget his Hebrew after being 22 years away. Why? Because he was constantly speaking Hebrew. Don't ask me who he was speaking to, because I don't know who understood him. I'll be honest with you. But he was speaking Hebrew. Maybe when he was speaking to himself, maybe he taught those close to him, maybe he spoke like a Yiddish or like a Ladino, which was a mixture of the two, however you want to call it. But he was steadfast to his mother tongue. What was so special about Joseph being committed to his mother tongue? Zera Shimshon explains. Joseph was telling his brothers, go home to daddy and tell him not to worry about the decree of his descendants being in exile because of him allowing Aramaic to answer our Torah. I rectified that. You know how? By me speaking only Hebrew outside of the land of Israel, specifically in the place of our exile. So I combated it. I rectified exactly what he may think in his mind. Messed it up for his descendants in the land of Egypt. I fixed it. So come on down. No worry that we're going to be stuck here forever. To show you, the Zera Shimshon says how powerful Joseph was. So now how is Joseph likened to the burning bush? Joseph was saying, look at me. I've been in a land of complete impurity, full of temptation, full of physicality, full of the wrong morals, not our families and God's belief. Yet, I'm like that burning bush. I was not being consumed. I survived it. And with this, the Zera Shimshon explains in his geniusness. I hope you guys are following along. If not, please rewatch it because it is really, really genius. Okay? He says, go back to that Midrash. The Midrash says, because of the hatred of the brothers, God comes and reveals himself to Moses through the burning bush. That's one interpretation. That's because Sin'ah and Sineh are similar, hatred and the burning bush. But there's another reason. This is the other reason of, because Aramaic entered the Bible because of Jacob, and Joseph came and rectified it. That makes perfect sense for the verse that was quoted from Tehillim. The verse from Tehillim was quoted, Ga'alta bizra amecha. Ga'alta bizra amecha, that the Jewish people were redeemed through God's very strong hand. Why? Bnei Yaakov. Put a pause there. The children of Jacob. Children of Jacob, you know why you were exiled to Egypt? Because of Jacob. Because Jacob allowed Aramaic to enter Torah. Then it says, Ve'yosef Sela, and Joseph is the rock. It's because of Joseph you were redeemed. It wasn't because of Jacob and Joseph you were redeemed. It was Joseph who came and rectified Jacob, his father's mistake, by speaking specifically Hebrew in the land of Egypt. Fascinating. So now what does this mean to us? First of all, this means to us the commitment that Joseph had towards the Hebrew language was second to none. We need to learn from Joseph. Joseph taught his children. Joseph prepared Egypt for the entire Jewish population. We find ourselves in a similar situation. We're in exile. We're not in the land of Israel. We don't have our temple in its full and great glory and operation. We have an obligation. I'm sorry to tell you if you don't know about it, but we have an obligation to teach our children the Hebrew language, Lashon HaKodesh. Every Jewish boy and girl ought to have the opportunity and the ability to open a Chumash, Lashon HaKodesh, and read and understand. Now, we have that own obligation on ourselves as well. And it's never too late to learn. Rabbi Akiva proved that to us. And others even older than 40 who started learning can also do it. There's no age limit. Yes, the younger you are, the easier it is. But we should never give up on Lashon HaKodesh, on the Holy Tongue. Because only through the Holy Tongue can we truly understand the depths of our Torah, and we can actually preserve our transmission. This is one of the three great things that the Jewish people preserved. Leshonam, Diburam, Shemam, and Kesutam. The way they dressed, their names, and the way they spoke. These three things, by the way, are not even one of the 613 mitzvot. There's no commandment on how we have to dress. There's no commandment on how we have to speak. There's no commandment on how we have to name our children. But you know what the three things the Jewish people took upon themselves and they kept? Was these three things, because they understood that this is the core identity of an individual. Any individual, Jewish or not. The speech, the language you speak, the names you name your children, and the way a person dresses. A Jew has a different dress decorum. There's a dignified standard. Men their way, women their way. But they have a certain standard that makes you look and even continues to make you act like a Jew. Jews are supposed to speak a certain way, speak a certain language. We're supposed to name our children Jewish names. Okay? Well, let's move on, because we could speak about this literally for the rest of the night, but we have to move on. Okay? This we learned specific from Joseph. Let's take this message home that we have an obligation to teach our children and our grandchildren and ourselves, if we don't know yet, the Hebrew language, Lashon HaKodesh. We see this is what spared Joseph and the Jewish people actually being exiled, and it actually, as we know till today, keeps on allowing our transmission to move on. Why are we called the people of the book? Art Scrolls new. It's less than 100 years old, maybe 50 years old, 60 years old at tops. Jews were always literate. Jews were always able to read and write. Let's not let the 21st century get the better of the most of our Jewish youth and rob them from our rich language of the Holy Tongue, Lashon HaKodesh. With this, we're going to segue into the next part. This is quite short. I know we're running late on time. We're going to segue into the next part that the Zera Shimshon speaks to us about. And this is a little later. This is after Moses accepts upon himself to go visit Paro and be the messenger. And Paro tells him, tough luck. No way. Get out of here. You think I'm going to listen to you and your God and let my free slave labor that's building me cities just vanish and go away? No way. Not happening. Let me quote the verse. The verse is in chapter 5, verse 4. Vayomer alechem melech Mitzrayim. And the king of Egypt, Paro, tells them. Who's them? Moses and Aaron. LeMoshe and Aaron. Okay, it says it. Sorry. Okay. Lama tafriyu et ha'am mima'asav. Why are you bothering this nation from their work? Lechu lesivlotechem. Go back to your own burdens. Interesting. Rashi says, Paro couldn't tell Moses and Aaron, get back to work, because they were from the tribe of Levi. And they were never part of the enslavement. They never became slaves. So that's why he told them, go mind your own business, go back to your tents, go back to twiddling your thumbs, go back to learning about your ridiculous God, because you are disturbing my free slave labor workforce. Was that enough words? That's exactly what he was telling him. Get lost. On this, the Zera Shimshon asks the question we're all asking, well, why wasn't the tribe of Levi enslaved with the rest of the Jewish people? 12 tribes and one's left out? How does that happen? So I want to first give you the answer of the Midrash, and then I'm going to give you the answer of the Zera Shimshon. Both equally amazing in their own right. The Midrash tells us that this is how... Okay, the Midrash answers another question, and it answers this one as well. How is it possible that Paro is able to get thousands and thousands, at this point even millions of Jews, free people, to become his slaves. Are Jews just stupid? That they go from being free to being slaves? No, but they're not too far off. Listen to this. Paro came up, and this was Havanit Chakemalo. The Midrash says, let's get smart with them. He comes up and he puts up a sign. January 1st, what year was it? For argument's sake. 2380. Whatever the number is. I won't give an exact date. Anyone who wants to come and start building the brand new cities of Ramses will be paid $1,000 for only 1 day's of work. $1,000. And special preview, Paro himself is coming out with a hammer and a drill, and he's building along with you. Every Jew likes to see a politician. Every Jew likes to be in the company of a king. And tell me which Jew doesn't like money? $1,000 a day? Let's say I won't work Shabbos. That's $6,000 a week. That's a good living. That's me. That's my son. That's my wife. That's this. That's that. We're raking it in. Sounds good, right? I'm getting a bunch of smiles. Not too good, because look what happened. So the first week they were paid $1,000 a head per day. That's pretty good. Next week they come up with a notice. Even though Paro worked with you guys all week this week, but now he's got to get back to his politics and his running the country, so he's going to be absent. And since there's so many of workers, we're going to have to drop the wages to $750 a day. Okay, that's fair. Why not? $750, free breakfast, lunch, and supper. Why not? Next week, drop to $500. Next week, drop to $250 a day. Next week, drop to $100 for the week. Then they're thinking to themselves, this is ridiculous. Why would I ever work for $100 a week? Makes no sense. So a couple guys started missing work. They went back to the yeshiva. They went back to the kollel. They went back to the Torah center. They said, this is not for me. There's better coffee and cookies at the yeshiva than what they're serving for lunch over there, and it's only $100. Anyone who missed found themselves dead the next day. And therefore, no one missed work anymore. Another week passed, and there was no paycheck at the end of the week. And their Danish and coffee and cake turned into one meal a day of matzah. And over a period of time, not too long of time, Paro takes millions of free people and in a genius way turns them to be his personal slaves. And there was nothing anyone could do about it. So with that in mind, how did the tribe of Levi escape that? They never left the synagogue, the study hall, the Torah center from day one. They didn't fall for the bait like the rest of the Jews did. They said, what do I need more money for? I got everything I need here. Joseph set us up with this unlimited escrow fund of food, water, drink, everything we need, roof over our head. To just study Torah, do what we got to do over here. And that's what they stuck to. The entire tribe of Levi never left. So Paro had no strength, no rulership over the tribe of Levi. That's how come Moses and Aaron were able to come freely and go freely. You know what? It gets even better. Not only didn't he have rulership over them, they were still at the level of royalty. Remember, when Joseph brought his family down, they all treated the brothers and Jacob and their children as royalty. It was only the tribe of Levi which was spared from this. Okay? This is a lesson in life that we shouldn't look for the bait. Don't look for the deal of the day. Don't lose focus and concentration from the main goal in life. I think I said enough. We get the point. Okay. Listen to the Zera Shimshon's answer. The Zera Shimshon says, there's a verse that said to Abraham. The verse is in Genesis 15, verse 13. So chapter 15, verse 13, it says as follows. Ki ger yeh zaracha be'eretz lo lahem. That your descendants will be strangers in a land that's not theirs. Vavadum v'yinu otam. And they will be working and they will be afflicted. Okay. They will serve them and they'll be oppressed. based on this, Zera Shimshon says, well, doesn't that verse seem to include all of the tribes, all of Abraham's descendants? Why is Levi left out? Look how the Zera Shimshon answers. He answers with a midrash that says, as soon as Joseph and his brothers died, this brings us back to what we were speaking about before, the Jewish people say, they come up brazen, as we say in Yiddish, chutzpah. They came out and said, we're not circumcising our boys anymore because we want to be like the Egyptians. Can you imagine? Even nowadays, most Jews still circumcise their boys. Okay? But the Jews back then came out and they made a statement. Let's be like the Egyptians. Let's not circumcise our boys. That's pretty severe. So, the Zera Shimshon says, based on this midrash, it seems that if the Jews would have... the midrash ends off after they said that God turned the love that the Egyptians had for the Jews into hatred. Okay? So because they wanted to be more like them, right? They were getting into their politics, into their entertainment, into their business. They weren't circumcising themselves because they wanted to be equals with the Egyptians. That's when God now said, okay, enough party time for you. Now we got to turn off the love and the friendship and turn it on to despise and hatred, which in other words is the anti-Semitism we spoke about a month ago. Something like that, right? At that point, the Zera Shimshon says, according to this midrash, if the Jews would have continued circumcising themselves, well then, they would have never been enslaved. Good? If the midrash tells us the reason why the Egyptians started hating us and enslaving us was because they stopped circumcising, so if they would have circumcised themselves, they would have never ended up as slaves. Make sense? Again, the Zera Shimshon says, that sounds a little not fair to the verse that was told to Abraham. It was told to Abraham that his nation will go down to a foreign land and they will be enslaved. So, does the circumcision have anything to do with it or not? Answers the Zera Shimshon. I'm doing it quickly. Answers the Zera Shimshon is that there's two parts to this decree of exile. The first is the idea of being a stranger in a foreign land. But who said they had to be oppressed and inflicted? If they would have kept to the Brit Milah, they would have been just in a foreign land for 210 years. But if they stopped circumcising their children, then the end of the pasuk, Vavadum v'inu otam, they will be enslaved and they will be oppressed. Comes as Zera Shimshon says, the Levi tribe never stopped circumcising their boys. And because of that, God's decree of slavery and oppression could have never taken effect on them. Moses and Aaron and the rest of the tribe of Levi, not only like the first interpretation, stayed in the yeshiva, stayed in the kollel, in the synagogues and the Torah centers, but they kept on circumcising their boys. And that's why Paro had no right to rule over them and turn them into slaves. We see from here that the power of circumcision saves one from exile. We are now at the time of the world that's called Ikvita de Mashiach. It's the end of time coming close to the Mashiach. Brit Milah, a mitzvah, commandment, that the Jewish people are very steadfast in nowadays, is something which will serve as a tremendous aid for us during the time of Mashiach, during the time of our redemption. It's something we are not to take lightly. It's something that we need to encourage others to do. I get questions all the time. Being a mohel and having another world-renowned mohel with us this evening, Saif the Knife, Rabbi Saif, who's with us. As mohels, we always get these questions of these individuals. Oh, why should we circumcise? It's something archaic. It's something dangerous. It's something of the past. Why do it? It's something that we are not allowed to forego. It needs to be done properly. It needs to be done according to the Jewish law and ritual. It needs to be done to every single Jewish boy. This is something that is going to help us out of our exile, but it's also going to hopefully maintain and keep us on a certain spiritual level even throughout our exile. The concept of a circumcision is committing an oath, a pact to our Creator in the organ which is the most sensitive, which has the potential most desire and lust. that we are committing ourselves to God in every way possible. This is something that we bring onto our children from a very young age, and we teach them about it their whole life. The kedusha, the holiness and sanctity that the Jewish people have to preserve is what gives them their greatest connection to God. This fits in very nicely with these weeks, the weeks of Shovavim. The first 6 weeks of the book of Exodus are the weeks where are very special time for the Jewish people, and specifically men, to work on their levels of holiness opposed to impurity. What we do, the way we speak, what we see, guarding those gates of our body, and hopefully committing ourselves to a greater way to God, to His Torah, and to His commandments. So let's take the lesson of Joseph, just as a recap. Joseph made sure that 2 great things were done. Number 1, that the Hebrew language was preserved, and he set them up for it in Egypt. And number 2, the circumcision. Joseph's intention was actually that not only the Jewish people should circumcise themselves, but they should be comfortable in circumcising themselves. Because what did he do? He circumcised every Egyptian when he sold them food. So Joseph knew language and brit. Funny, they're the only 2 organs that we have that are singular. The tongue and the male organ. There's only one of, right? 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 2 eyes, 2 hands. Everything's a double of. The 2 foundations, the Brit HaLashon, the covenant of the tongue, and the Brit HaYesod, and the covenant of one's Brit Milah, are the 2 greatest foundations that our nation and our patriarchs, and Joseph included, knew about, and that along the centuries, our Jewish people realized when we guard our tongue, and when we guard our Brit, that will be the key to our success. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless us in the merit of studying the Zera Shimshon, to us, our families, our friends, and all of Klal Yisrael. Amen. Amen.